Hello and welcome to episode 237 of Stand Up. Joining me today from Princeton, Dr. Eddie Glaude. I'm Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the show. Lots to talk with you about today. I hope that you are doing well, hanging in there here on this Thanksgiving week as the transition from Donald Trump to Joe Biden officially begins. COVID numbers continue to spike, and most of us will be staying home for this Thanksgiving holiday. I'm very happy to have you joining me. Awesome guest joining me today, Dr. Eddie Glaude of Princeton University, who you may have seen often on MSNBC, where his rants so often go viral. He's a scholar at Princeton University and a doctor, a PhD, the chair of the Department of African American Studies, a very prestigious guy. And to get him to join me is no small feat. Very excited about that. And our conversation is fantastic because he is amazing to talk. And I always learn so much in our conversations. But first, I wanted to mention, as a way to both complain and entertain you, the neighbor fight has escalated. My next door neighbor now has called the town and said that first I was doing illegal construction. The guy came over. I showed him I was doing no construction. And then he said that everything's fine, went away, and then came back and knocked on my door today and said, you know what, on second thought, it looks like the awning that you built off of your shed is a little too close to the town property line. And the town property line is a forest. The awning is too close to a forest, bothering no one, seen by no one, causing no problems. And he's now telling me I have to take that down. And I told him, well, listen, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to do. I think you should go. And thanks for stopping by. But if there's an issue, have whoever from the town needs to contact me and we'll go from there. But time to go. Thank you very much. So, yeah, my neighbor not letting up. Unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. This town I live in is crummy. It really is. And, you know, I think that there's probably a lot of people out there who live in areas where they're not from. In a weird kind of way, at least in our situation, that's always been kind of the problem. It's kind of sucked when you're not from a certain area and you don't have a major network that goes back like generations of people to look out for you. You're also missing people in the town that you're connected to that can cause problems. And there's just very little that you can do about it. You know, I don't know who they're talking to or why they're talking to them. But, you know, when you're dealing with people that have lived in a community for a couple of generations or more, and you're the new person in town and you don't have as many friends. And that's always been our situation. And it's just terrible. It's terrible that a neighbor would cause you problems when you're doing nothing at all wrong. And probably, as you hear me complaining about it, is there something you're not telling us, Pete? Nope, nothing I'm not telling you. The lady just doesn't like us. And I don't know why. And now they are going to try to make me take down part of the shed. It's not over, I say. It's not over. I'll keep you updated because I know you're interested. And if you have any advice, by all means, send it my way. What would you do? I'm not big on getting revenge. I'm not big on escalating and fighting it back. And I wish that I could just bring her a pie and it would all go away. But we're long past that point because there's just too much history with her complaining about things for no apparent reason. All right, so moving on. Much more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, than my neighbor quarrel is that the transition has officially begun. Georgia and Michigan certified their results in Joe Biden's favor on Monday. More Senate Republicans and Republicans in general have admitted it is over. It is time to transition, including members from the business community. GM is now saying they're not going to back Trump's emission standards. Thomson Reuters reports General Motors said on Monday it was reversing course and will no longer back the Trump administration's effort to bar California from setting its own emission rules in an ongoing court fight. The chief executive there, GM, Mary Barra, said in a letter to environmental groups it was, quote, immediately withdrawing from the preemption litigation and inviting other automakers to join us. The dramatic rejection of Trump came as GM sought to work with President-elect Joe Biden, who has made boosting electric vehicles a top priority. Huge news. The Detroit automaker laid out an ambitious strategy to boost EV sales last week and said it'd increase spending on EVs and autonomous vehicles by 35% from previous disclosed plans. They see the writing on the wall. They know what the future holds, and they know how they want to make money. It's on electric vehicles because they have become affordable, competitive, and they can go long range, which was an issue for many of you not wanting to buy them. I, of course, am an early adapter with my Chevy Volt, and now I can't justify buying a new one yet. But hopefully that's going to happen soon. Anyway, that is a huge announcement, and it reflects corporate America's move to engage more quickly with the incoming Biden administration. Also, for 4 years, one of the people in the business community who's been closest to Donald Trump is the Blackstone Group Chief Executive Officer Stephen Schwarzman, who has publicly stood by President Donald Trump, even as so many other corporate bosses have turned their backs on him. And now he's counseled the president. He's talked on the phone. He's helped shape the tax law. He's thrown a lot of money at his reelection campaign, more than apparently anybody else in American finance, Stephen Schwarzman of Blackstone Group. And now Stephen Schwarzman, 73, is acknowledging that Trump has lost and Joe Biden will be the next president. And he issued a statement on Monday saying he was ready to help the Biden administration. The Biden administration, for its part, named a bunch of people that he's appointing to the cabinet, and I'll tell you who those are in a moment. But to finish up this part about Republicans announcing the truth is here, and they can't deny it anymore. The media is what matters most, in my opinion. And first, we hear from Laura Ingraham over on Fox News. She has admitted it is over, and you just have to hear it. Here she is from her show on Monday night.
Gave the go-ahead for the transition. You see it there. And as unpleasant and disappointing as these past 3 weeks have been to so many of us, as much as we wish things were different, this is where things stand tonight. Now, legal challenges continue in a number of states. Serious questions about vote counting, poll watcher access are outstanding. But unless the legal situation changes in a dramatic and, frankly, an unlikely manner, Joe Biden will be inaugurated on January 20th.
That's right.
Now, to say this does not mean I don't think that this election was rife with problems and potential fraud.
It wasn't.
And to say this does not constitute being a sellout to the conservative populist movement that I've been fighting for, 25 years.
They'll call you that anyway.
It does not mean that I disagree at all with the president's right and obligation to pursue all legitimate legal challenges to this outcome. To say this constitutes living in reality.
They don't live in reality.
If I offered you a false reality, if I told you that there was an excellent, phenomenal chance that the Supreme Court was going to step in and deliver a victory to President Trump, I'd be lying to you.
You're going to lose fans.
You've known me for a long time now, and you know me long enough to know that I will not lie to you or simply tell you what you want to hear. But what I will tell you tonight is that even amidst an election loss, there is an enormous amount for us to be hopeful about.
And Laura Ingraham went on to try to keep the Trumpsters on her side, but they won't. They're going to turn on her. You'll see. They're already turning on Fox News. But what about Rush Limbaugh? Could they turn on him as well? Here is Rush Limbaugh on his show Monday admitting it. And I think these are two titans. For them to say what they're saying in these two sound bites, it's a big deal. It matters. And here's Rush Limbaugh saying the legal campaign here has been a disaster, basically.
Call a gigantic press conference like that, one that lasts an hour, and you announce massive bombshells, then you better have some bombshells. There better be something at that press conference other than what we got, such as a hacker who can tell us, yep, everything these guys have said is true. I've looked into it. I've run the software. I've hacked this. I've hacked that. Even put him behind a screen if you want to protect his identity. But you can't. I talked to so many people who were blown away by it. By the very nature of the press conference. But they promised blockbuster stuff and then nothing happened.
Wow.
And that's not. Well, it's not good. I mean, if you're going to promise blockbuster stuff like that, then there has. Now, I understand. Look, I'm the one that's been telling everybody this stuff doesn't happen at warp speed, light speed. the way cases are made for presentation in court. But if you're going to do a press conference like that with the promise of blockbusters, then there has to be something more than what that press conference delivered. Now, Sidney Powell is supposedly out, jumped a shark, got out over the skis, but apparently she's still going to be working along with Lynn Wood, trying to make the case that she says is there to be made all along. Time, of course, is of the essence now, as it is speedily vanishing.
Yeah.
So they're going to...
Yeah, that's it, Rush. I've heard enough from you, but those are both two big names in conservative media saying that it's over. And that matters. It matters so much. I think media, right-wing media, is so powerful, so influential. And when they turn, a lot of people turn with them. And Trump's voice is only going to get weaker, not having the bully pulpit of the presidency. And so what does his time remaining mean? What will happen? That is a question for a lot of us would like to know the answer to. All right. So there you go. Laura Ingraham and Rush Limbaugh turning their backs, as well as many Republican congressmen, on Trump. We're not turning their backs on him, but clearly admitting that it's over. And also wanted to share with you, of course, the news of Joe Biden. Some of his picks were announced on Monday as well. I mentioned already about Tony Blinken as Secretary of State, and I think it's important to watch how the progressive spectrum reacts to this, kind of the further to the left and the more moderate, further to the center, Democrats and progressives, how they respond. And so far, so good. There wasn't really a lot of outrage by any of the choices that the president-elect has announced on Monday. He announced Tony Blinken, as I said, as Secretary of State, Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, Avril Haines, Director of National Intelligence, Alejandro Mayorkas, who is Department of Homeland Security Secretary, and U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who is a black woman, and Special Presidential Envoy on Climate, John Kerry. So there's a lot of diversity in terms of ethnicity and gender in the picks that he has announced so far. He also plans to name several top national security picks, including the first Latino to lead the Department of Homeland Security, the first woman to head the intelligence community, and a former Secretary of State, John Kerry, to be his international climate czar, which is going to be a cabinet level position working out of the White House. So big names being announced, and not a lot of division on those names so far. There might be some more, I think, from the left when he announces who everybody is speculating is going to be his Department of Defense, Secretary of Defense, who's a woman named Michelle Flournoy, who some people might not, on the left, might see as a bit too interventionist, I guess. Some people I'm hearing, but we'll see how that is reacted to. As far as COVID, on Monday, 150,000 new cases announced, 1,000 dead Americans, 80,000 people are in the hospital. And one of my daughter's friends' grandmother is COVID positive, and she was hanging out with that friend, and they all had to get tested. How has it hit your home on this Thanksgiving week? Have you canceled plans? Have you made plans? Are you going to be driving somewhere? I'm not going to shame anybody, but I think it's important that we try to stay put and not potentially move this virus further around the country than it already is traveling on its own. All right, let me get to a news dump in a second. But first, Christine Thomas, thank you for a very kind comment on Patreon. She is a longtime supporter and listener and subscriber to the show. And she wrote, if this podcast could be described like food, I would rate it delicious. It contains some of the most relevant information I've heard to living life in a very long time. I'm buying both of Celeste Headley's books and going to watch her TED Talk. Thank you again, Pete. Celeste on the show yesterday. A really great episode. Thank you, Christine. Very kind of you. If you haven't subscribed yet with a paid subscription, please do. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Maybe we can get past 800 by the end of the week or by the end of the month. By the end of the month, can we get past 800 subscribers to the show and adding to the community of amazing, kind, generous, thoughtful, hilarious people that are listening and now connecting with each other as well. And we need that now more than ever. So thank you very much for your feedback, Christine, and everybody else. Lots of very kind things being said. And now it's time for a news dump. All right, let's start off with some game show host news. How about that? Jeopardy set to resume production on November 30th, and viewers are going to see Alex Trebek's hosting duties temporarily filled by interim guests, according to FoxNews.com. That's where I'm getting this? I mean, everybody's reporting the same thing. It's Jeopardy has tapped Ken Jennings as first guest show host for Jeopardy. Of course, Ken Jennings, a longtime Jeopardy champion, and additional guest hosts will be announced, but we're still mourning the loss of great American Alex Trebek, who seemed to be pretty universally loved in a time where we're so divided over so much. Workers are on strike at 11 Illinois nursing homes, demanding higher wages and pandemic hazard pay. Nearly 700 nursing home workers have gone on strike in the Chicago area. Good luck to them. Let's support them. Really, really important and interesting news, and I think we're probably going to see a lot more of that. Dow futures rise more than 200 points as the Trump administration begins transition process. The financial markets like certainty, and it looks like we're getting some. We know who the next president is going to be, Joe Biden. But how much damage can Trump do on the way out? That's more news. Jupiter and Saturn will form a rare double planet in the sky just before Christmas. That's cool. I always like astronomy news. Jupiter and Saturn will appear to align this December, creating a double planet in the night sky. The first time since the Middle Ages the planets have aligned this close. You can see on the winter solstice, December 21st. Oh, that's a cool story I'm glad I mentioned. I should have mentioned this in the coronavirus news, but a coronavirus vaccine by AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford is reported to be effective for the majority of people in a clinical trial. It's the third vaccine to hit this milestone, and great news, their vaccine 70% effective in preventing COVID-19. Somebody emailed me, Mike H., saying that he read a story that it's going to cost a lot of money, the vaccine. I haven't seen that. Has anybody else seen that? They can't charge you much, if anything, for this vaccine. Or any of these vaccines. But let me know what you're seeing. And another happy animal story to end the news dump. Authorities in southern India managed to rescue an elephant that fell into a well about 50 feet deep, according to NPR. It took 12 hours and 3 main steps, using pipes to pump out some of the water, sedating the elephant, and hoisting it safely out with a crane. Check it out at NPR, and there's video at The Guardian if you want to see that. All right, that is your news dump. Now let me get to my guest today. He is a professor at Princeton. Need I say more? Isn't that impressive, everybody? He is the chair of the African American Department, African American Studies. He is the author of several books, including Democracy and Black, How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul, and In a Shade of Blue, Pragmatism and the Politics of Black America. Most recently, however, his most recent book is James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. He is also on Twitter at ESGlaude. You can see him on MSNBC all the time. Ladies and gentlemen, back on Stand Up, it's Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr. right now.
I don't recognize you without a Windsor knot. It's
Are
like
we showing this? I thought this was the podcast. I could just be.
I sometimes include the video, but don't.
Okay.
I don't have to. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
All right, there he is, as I've just told you all about, and one of my all-time favorite people to watch and to read. And congratulations, by the way, Professor, on the success of your most recent book. It's been put on some pretty impressive lists. Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own has been put on some pretty great end-of-year book lists. Congrats.
Thank you so much, and thank you for helping make it a success. You know, I really appreciate coming on your show and talking about it. And,
what percentage?
Thank you so much.
What percentage of the sales would you attribute to your appearances here?
I have no idea, but if it was one book or if it was 500 books, I'm just excited and thankful.
Great to see you, and great to be in conversation with you. I have a lot of questions for you. First is though, you have been doing you do a lot of media, and I really appreciate you joining me. You must get many invites a week. You do book talks, you do other people's book talks, you do podcasts, you do YouTube shows, you do conferences. Of course, you do a ton of stuff on MSNBC where you're a contributor. Does it get exhausting? Does it get old? Are there some things that you prefer than others?
Well, it doesn't get old because, we're in this moment and, you want to be able to at least offer some contribution to helping us get through it. It's exhausting, because, you don't want to be repetitive. You want to be thoughtful and listen and answer questions in the moment, although you find yourself repeating yourself at times. And, my voice is annoying. So, after a while, you just want to say, could you just shut up? That's my other voice telling me that, so that I could actually spend more quiet time reading and thinking. It's hard to just constantly talk because you don't have the space to sit down and settle down into some thinking around particular ideas and the like. And so the craziness of the times have pulled me out of the solitude that thinking requires.
Well said. The craziest of the times and the moment that we're in. I'll pick up on those two.
Sure. I
want to check in with where you were at on election night and the week following. Do you celebrate? Was there relief, or is there just not enough time, or is it not a big enough win, or are there too many concerns around the election itself?
Well, election night, I was actually doing Peacock Television with Morning Joe. And I remember the results were coming in from Florida. And I was having a full-blown anxiety attack on this platform. And I was like, what the hell? I didn't really, I wanted to say what's going on here. And so what really followed from that moment was me trying to make sense of what I thought should have been a blowout. After 4 years of evidence of who this guy actually is, 73 million plus Americans voted for him. And so as the election has been unfolding, because it's not over, apparently, for some of these folk, I've been trying to wrap my mind around what this division actually means, what it suggests, and the trouble that we find ourselves in this moment.
I feel like one question I've been asking a lot of smart people is that I'm not that surprised. I'm devastated and disappointed and depressed that so many people voted for Donald Trump after they got to see him perform, after the pandemic. But one of the things that I attribute to is this old paradigm of the individual versus the collective, the rugged individualism, the you can't tell me what to do, the kind of anti-government mentality, and the rest of us, if you will. How do you see that with this election? It seems like I hate to say this, but it seems like a lot of people just don't care about other people outside of their family, maybe their local community, people that they don't know. How do you look at the individual versus the collective when it comes to Trump, the election, the pandemic, and us just not caring about each other?
Well, I think that's really insightful, Pete. It seems to me that for the last 40 years, we have been living under a particular kind of ideological frame. And what I mean by that is that a certain political and economic ideology has transformed us from being citizens in relation to each other into self-interested persons in pursuit of our own aims and interests, in competition and rivalry with others. And so an idea of a robust conception of the public good has been eviscerated over the last 40 years. And so folks are just out for themselves. And so it has become the case now that, as I've said before, wearing a mask is a sign of governmental tyranny. And liberty has become a synonym for selfishness. And so here we are in the midst of a pandemic. Over 250,000 people are dead. And people are still clamoring about the overreach of government. I've even had people text me in Tennessee, legislation has already been put forward to allow Christian communities to not take the vaccine. Right? In the name of liberty.
Do they have to send their kids to school? Fine. You don't have to take the vaccine, but you can't send your kid to school.
But this is where we are. So I'm thinking this is the culmination of a political and economic ideology that has made selfishness a virtue. I have a book somewhere around here written by Ayn Rand called The Virtue of Selfishness, right? And there's a certain form of politics that this is, the superordinate value. So it becomes so I think you're absolutely right. There are folk who are just racist, who just want America to be a white nation. And then you have folk who are selfish and greedy.
Well, let me put that into a race paradigm, and I promise that's the last time I'll use the word paradigm, folks. But I am talking to a Princeton professor, and sometimes the words have to be a tiny bit bigger to impress. So I wonder if there is Black people understand community better, not because they're better people, but because they need community still to survive. You need to rely on one another. There needs to be a trust there. I'm just making this up, out of my ass right now. White people seem to not be more likely to be the kind of more selfish individualists because we have more privilege. We have a history of not necessarily needing to rely on whether it be a government program or policy, much less a family member. Is there anything to the difference between the Black American community and the white American community in terms of understanding community?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. I would say that there are different histories that impact how we imagine our relationship to each other. So because of the history of white supremacy in this country, there's an idea of linked fate, as the political theorist Michael Dawson talks about it among Black communities, that my fate is tied to my fellow's condition. And that linked fate has implications for how we do politics. It has effects in how we live with each other. There's a broader set of concern because we have borne the brunt of America's prejudices, as it were. But, I think there are rich, thick ideas of community in other places. I mean, you can think about rural America, white America. You can think about ethnic enclaves throughout cities and how tightly knit some of those are. But I think all of us, I want to just say this very clearly, white people don't have a monopoly on selfishness. Right? And we saw the numbers tick up, although we're not quite sure what that exit poll data is suggesting. But we saw the numbers tick up among Latino voters for Trump, Asian American voters for Trump, African American men particularly voting for Trump. White folk don't have a monopoly on selfishness, though. I want to be very clear about that.
I realize that. I guess I'm not sure exactly what the point I was trying to make. It's just the idea that this whole anti-government thread, you mentioned Ayn Rand and all of that. It's not exclusively white, obviously, but there's that kind of political belief. I rarely hear it from minorities. I feel absolutely. And we have to understand that anti-government sentiment is deeply rooted in a response to the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century. So there's a lot of this talk about small government, a lot of this talk about governmental overreach and the like. It's everything to do with the attempt to break the back of segregation in the South and de facto segregation in the North. So it is in some ways deeply rooted in this idea that some believe that the nation must remain a white nation in the vein of old Europe. So absolutely. I've been struggling with an emotion I've been dealing with for the last 2 days now. When it was a couple nights ago, I guess this will post on Monday, I think, Eddie. But when the Wayne County electors, these two Republicans, were going to throw out the votes of almost exclusively Black people from Detroit, and I was following that on Twitter. I was paying close attention to what was happening. And I saw that the Republican leader in the state house was basically like, that's not going to happen. We're not going to let them do that. The Republican. And then I looked at the triumvirate of women, the AG, the Secretary of State, and the governor of Michigan. I'm like, it's not going to happen. This is not going to happen. So I tweeted, calm down, everybody. Because everybody needed me to do that, I think. They were waiting for me. The world had stopped. Waiting for me to tell them how to feel. Black people who follow me, which I'm proud of, have a pretty good diverse following my Twitter feed, jumped all over me. They're like, what? Don't tell us to calm down. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, how disconnected and insensitive that was. So I went from being flip, telling people to calm down, to Eddie, I went, and I still am struggling with this. I went from flip to supporting violence. If you work so hard to get the vote, and then someone is going to take the vote, I never condone violence, but I was like, I would be okay with it. I would support it. If you take the vote, then I can burn your house down and slash your tires. Totally fine with that. Tell me what's wrong with that. Tell me why that wouldn't work, and tell me why I'm feeling that for the first time, therapist.
Well, I wish I could tell you, look, it seems to me reasonable. I was just talking with Stephen Henderson of NPR out of Detroit, who just the other day offered this extraordinary commentary about what it meant for the board of canvassers to try to take away their vote, and how it connected to his father and his father. Right?
Oh, interesting. I want to hear it.
And it was this rage that had something to do with generational exclusion.
Sure.
Right. And that rage is reasonable, and you cannot displace it. It's so obvious what they're doing, how they're trying to disenfranchise Black voters in Wayne County, in the Detroit area. And so I don't want to suggest to you that, anger and however it might be expressed is wholly unjustified. The only question that you have to ask yourself is how efficacious it would be, right? What work would it do? But I'm never the one to say, if somebody tried to take our vote in this way, that we shouldn't be rageful in our response.
Well, you think about, you think if ever violence is justified, most people, even most pacifists, like I think I consider myself, self-defense. I said on the podcast, I was like, listen, if someone broke into my house, I'm not like some egotistical masculine guy is going to like try to kill him. I'm like, take what you need. Don't hurt anybody. Just please don't hurt anybody. I can't think of many instances where I would want to be violent, where I would support it. But the idea of like when we think about foreign wars and our involvement in them and, spreading democracy and all that bullshit, it's like, if anything, then it would be this, taking away the vote. You don't all the policies that you speak to and write to and ideas, they don't matter if we don't have access to the vote, it would seem. Is that too simple?
Well, no, I think the vote is important, is an important pillar of our democracy. Right. And, a former colleague, she's now dead, Judith Sklar, a political theorist, actually made the point that America wasn't a real democracy until the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Yeah. And
it didn't become a democracy until 1965. And what we're seeing, and this is why I really love your indignation here, righteous indignation, is that these people don't give a damn about democracy. So the vote becomes a kind of a metaphor, right? A kind of a synecdoche, really, a part for the whole, that what we're angry about is not necessarily them taking the vote from me or from Black folk. And generally, of course, that's horrifying. But what it really reveals is that you don't give a damn about democracy as such. And then what sorts of judgments about you am I to make from that conclusion, draw from that conclusion?
Well, I have a list here of those judgments. Let me get it out of the, I try not to, but how do you feel about, I heard Trump's insane lawyers, not Rudy Giuliani, the other woman, I think her name is Sidney Powell, talking about patriotism. How do you feel about when people talk about patriotism that also don't respect democracy? Like, I'm not Mr. Patriotic over here. I don't really understand patriotism that well, but you can't talk about patriotism and then, undertake a miscarriage of democracy, it would seem.
Oh man, we've known that hypocrisy from the day we stepped off the slave ship.
Yeah.
That contradiction has been in full view across generations in Black America. You think about it. People are saying, people are claiming patriotism in their response to Kaepernick.
Right.
That doesn't make any damn sense,
right.
Given the right to protest and the freedom of speech and da da da. There, we know there were patriots who justified the assassination of Dr. King, who responded to the ongoing subordination of Black. That contradiction in the country has always been in full view for us. And so, you know what? To put it crudely, when I hear it, when I see it, it's a crude generalization, but I'll say it anyway. White folk doing white folk.
Could you ever write an essay or a book with that title? That is good. I will help you. However, I'll be your white correspondent on that one. You teach and write about religion a lot. The other thing that I just always come back to is Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism. This usage of religion specifically. By the way, when we're talking about America, we're generally talking about Christianity. That's why sometimes people are like, well, why don't you ever, get indignant about Islam or Judaism? I do. I all of it bothers me, the dogma and the fundamentalist form. But this is a Christian nation in that the vast majority of people who identify as religious are Christian, and they are also white, just because of the numbers. But this has also been used. You can take us all the way back as an excuse. How has it morphed, developed, and evolved, white Christian nationalism, and what role do you think it played in this election and in politics in America today? Is it weakening? Is it strengthening?
Oh, no, it's strengthening. It's doing both at the same time, right? Because white evangelicalism has plateaued. They're in terms of its numbers, it's not growing.
Good.
So young folk are moving away from it. They're moving away from the identification with evangelical or self-identification as evangelical in some ways. We're seeing ideological disputes and theological disputes within that grouping. But for the most part, it is flatlined or it's declining in terms of its scale, but it still has outsized influence within the Republican Party and in the nation at large. When we look at the exit poll data, and that data right now is so sketchy because of the size of the mail-in vote.
Yeah, I haven't loved the conversations about it, and that's why I chose really probably not to even ask you about it today and others. I'm like, I don't think we know yet how people voted and why they voted yet.
But, Robert P. Jones of PRI, which is, a public religion kind of think tank, they've been doing a cross-tab analysis of white evangelical voting and with the data they currently have, and the numbers are off the charts. They're voting at at the same levels or even higher than 2016 for Donald Trump. And what you see here is that it's also in alignment with the illiberal practices that we're finding in Hungary, that we're seeing in Russia, right? That there is a sense in which a certain kind of Christian nationalism that is being wrapped up in this kind of white nationalist ideology. And these folk are connecting with those folk, and we're seeing networks built across the globe. So, and it has a lot to do with, I think, Peter, in a very interesting and complex way, with this sense of deepening precarity. And, I use that word, but this sense that folk are losing ground,
right? That
they're not making ends meet. And so they're reaching for something. That's the generous read. The more sinister reading is that these folk don't care about democracy. They only care about a kind of Christian, rule that is principally for white folks.
What is it that drives? What is the difference? I mean, if black people are Christian and white people are Christian, I mean, I know a lot has been written about this, books and essays and everything, but just wanted to get your quick take on it in our conversation today. What is the divide there? How is it used? Why do white Christians believe what they do, and then black Christians go to a similar church with a similar teachings and they don't believe something different? I mean, it's a weird thing how it becomes so political and how it becomes so nationalistic.
Well, the funny thing is that when a Pew study a while back revealed this, that when you control for race among Black Christians, when you just control for race, take race out of the picture, Black Christians are as conservatives as Mormons.
I don't know what that means.
That means we bank right on values questions in terms of same-sex marriage, in terms of abortion, those questions that typically define the single issue voter of the white evangelical.
In terms of patriarchy?
When you control for race, many Black Christians suddenly become very, very conservative. But when you add race to the picture, they move because race shifts how one understands government policy, government's role in one's life. It has an impact. So the history of Black Christianity in this country, Peter, is very clear. It is in part a refutation of the idolatry of white Christianity. So when you ask the question, what is the difference?
Yeah.
It's in the adjectives. What is the adjective white doing to the noun Christian? That's the key question to ask.
Man, you're smart. Doing this a long time. I'm glad I asked that one. All right. So where are we at now in terms of on, the night that Joe Biden gave his speech, basically accepting, that he'd won, when the night the fireworks went off and he was terribly surprised by what was going on. It was hilarious. He was like, what are these? What is that, a drone? Anyway, but he had a very powerful speech, and it was very powerful to see, obviously, Kamala Harris and emotional on that stage. First of all, what does that mean? What does Kamala Harris symbolize to America and to Black America? How are you thinking about that moment in history? Because I actually didn't really talk to my daughters that much about Joe Biden or really that much about race. I said, there's a woman. Just watch her. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to the
it was
nation?
It was amazing. It's symbolically, it's significant. A Black woman, a descendant of South Asian, a person of South Asian descent, a person of Jamaican descent. I'm thinking, as I've said on television before, I'm thinking about all of those women, Black women who sacrificed to make her possible. Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, thinking about the Montgomery Citizens Council, that with Joanne Robinson, those women who did the stenographs to help organize the Montgomery bus boycott. Thinking about, those washerwomen in 1881 in Atlanta who went on strike because they weren't being paid enough. And it was like 13 of them and then suddenly became 3,000 of them. All of that is the wind behind her back. But symbolism can only take us so far. Yay, we broke another glass ceiling. I'm happy, but that was not the end game.
Right.
The electing Biden and Harris wasn't the end game. So much more is required.
Very well said. I really appreciate that historical perspective. So on that night, Joe Biden said something to the extent of, thank you to the African American community. Black folks had my back. Now I'll have your back. And it was interesting because more than a few older Black folks said I was waiting for our thank you. and when it came, I cried. I was waiting there, skeptically. Are you going to count us? Are you going to mention us as you go through who, contributed to this win, this effort? And I think that's awesome that he said it. But again, going back to what you just said, those are just words. Now we're starting to see the actions. We're starting to see him picking, certain people, trial balloons for people. I saw a lot of Black folks getting really worried about Rahm Emanuel, and I'm not quite sure what exactly that's about. If you can explain that, I have a little bit of a sense of it, him being the Chicago mayor. And maybe there's other things. But how do you turn those words into action? Because we know the Black community, Black voters who did so much work to help Joe Biden, Kamala Harris get elected, are going to be asking for receipts. So where do we go from here? And what are you thinking right now?
So, look, we need to understand that paying, having Black people's back isn't reducible to just simply appointing black political elites.
Mm-hmm.
So he can't reproduce what Clinton did and what Jimmy Carter did. And what do I mean? Both of them were elected in part because of extraordinary black support. And both of them ended up implementing policies that devastated black communities. You think about austerity policies that devastated cities during the Carter administration. You think about criminal justice, the crime bill. You think about welfare reform. We can go down the line in terms of the Clinton administration.
The drug
in some
war.
ways. Yeah, and so what you got though, you had a lot of black folk put in high political places though. That's not what we're talking about. So that's the first thing. It's not just enough.
Ben Carson's in a high political place.
Exactly. So that's not the answer to the point. So the first thing they have to do is, and I heard it yesterday actually, on where he said he wanted to flip it in terms of how they were going to respond to COVID-19. And that is that, typically we respond in such a way that the most vulnerable communities get responded to last. He says, we're going to flip that. So we have to deal with black and brown communities, poor communities, poor rural communities. And I really like that move, right? So the first thing he has to do is address the disparate impact of this pandemic that is devastating black communities and brown communities and native communities, right? It's devastating our communities. And so that has to happen. We have to see what that's going to look like in terms of actual policy. We got to see what that looks like in terms of the economic policy. I'm really interested, Peter, in who's going to be Secretary of Treasury.
Why? What is that?
If he puts another Rubinite in it, think about it.
Oh, yeah.
If you get another version of Tim Geithner, or you get another version of Larry Summers, if you get another of Robert Rubin coming out of that tradition, then it's the same economic philosophy that has produced this bullshit.
Yeah, that's what Obama did. It was crazy because during the transition, I remember he had my friend Jeff Sachs and I think Robert Reich even were advising him on it. And you were like, and that transition period mattered so much in terms of the economy and who was going to have that job, because that's what fucked everything up. The housing bubble and the financial industry. And then he brought in, I guess the way of thinking was, let's bring in the architects of the disaster because they're the only ones who can fix it. And it was such a stupid thing to think about finance, much less science or anything else. But yet that's who President Obama brought in, Tim Geithner and Larry Summers. And I think it's probably the biggest knock on the Obama legacy.
Well, at least in my mind, it is.
Oh, is it?
It's one of the serious indicators.
Because what are the financial policies that they supported that are not good for, if we want to talk about class rather than race or anything?
Well, look, when we're thinking about the financialization of the American economy, when we begin to think about, emphasizing Wall Street in terms of not in some ways addressing, the flattening of wages, when we think about what has happened to the American worker over the last 40 years, the economic philosophy that these people hold is part and parcel responsible for that. Right. And so we didn't see during the Obama years a kind of labor policy that would actually increase the life prospects of folk who work, because where are their interest lies with Wall Street and Silicon Valley. Yeah. Right. They are still committed to the financialization of our economy so that labor continues to suffer. Right. We didn't get a living wage out of the Obama administration. Right. Did we get a living wage out of that? Fight for 15 emerges within the context of not only those 8 years, but a little bit before, because wages had flatlined. And even Alan Greenspan said that the kind of wealth inequality that we are experiencing in this country is not sustainable. Obama said one of the greatest threats to the country wasn't just North Korea, it was wealth inequality. Yeah. And his policies were presented. They were in line with the economic philosophy that generated, in my view, that. But, Biden, again, the other day said that a lot of folk are going to be happy with his appointment as Secretary of Treasury because he said it's going to be able to satisfy those who are on the progressive as well as in the moderate wing of the party. I'm waiting to see.
I don't know who that could be. It's going to listen, every appointment is going to piss off a huge percentage of Americans that identify with one kind of political ideology. And I forget the right at this point. I want to ask you about that too. But at this point, it's like, I don't even know what the hell they're talking about. But if we're talking about people who believe that the earth revolves around the sun and climate change is real and vaccines are miracles, then we're arguing amongst that group of people about who should be running different agencies and what policies should be implemented to help people. But given all of that, what do you think about, and I saw that you've been talking about this as well, empathy right now in trying to understand those who supported Donald Trump and still support Trump. There's this hilarious, or tragic, I should say, media narrative where after 2016, I think the New York Times gets a lot of criticism, rightfully so, to reach out to the disenchanted, disenfranchised, forgotten people, as opposed to reach out to the people, the rest of the country. How do you look at where we progressives should be? As the host of this podcast and a national conversation, I'm constantly trying to understand how people arrive at their beliefs. And it's so hard to do. It's so hard to have compassion for and empathy for people who believe in certain things. And I could list them, but you're a guy who's very compassionate and thoughtful, yet also can be really very righteously indignant. And I love that about you. You can look at it both and understand, but what are we supposed to do now, sir?
You know, I don't want to presume that I have the answer, but I have an intuition.
Yeah.
And my intuition is that we need to simply try to build the world that we think is more just. That's what we need to do. And I use this as the example. When Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980, he did not spend an extraordinary amount of energy trying to convince the Democrats to invest in his worldview. He didn't spend all of this energy trying to get them to accept him for who he was. What he did, of course, the politics was a bit different back then. But what he did was he implemented Reaganism. That's what he did. They cut taxes. He broke the back of the Air Traffic Controllers Union, which was the preface to breaking the backs of unions. Yeah. Right? He changed the field. By the end of his first term, we were no longer playing on the field of FDR, to use Anand Giridharadas' image. We were no longer playing on the field of the New Deal. We were playing on the field, on the pitch of Reaganism and its assumptions. What we have to do in this moment is to assume that our ideas will benefit people who are living in the Rust Belt. Our ideals will change the life circumstances of those who are living in Nebraska and North Dakota and Montana, and we need to act on them. We need to govern. And I just think we're like an abused freaking spouse, right? They whip, they do us dirty. And then we constantly run back to them. We're longing for the Reagan Democrat, that we want him to love us. We want this heterosexual white male to come and grab us and give us this bear hug. And he is the center of our political imaginations. America does not look like that anymore. We need to change and really reach for a different way of governing and thinking about who we are as a nation.
I understand that, but the idea to water that down, when you say governing, we need to give people who are we need to give these white right-wing people an opportunity to have a better job, a better life, but that will also benefit everybody else. And we can think of all kinds of policies. Simply some kind of Green New Deal, that those words are damaged. Just if you work in coal and that's a dangerous job, we're now giving you a job in solar and you're going to get way more money. That's what I think you mean by governing, and what I'm saying about create an opportunity. The problem, though, I feel like with when you go back in history and when you talk about Reaganism and the way he did things, the problem is we have got a legislative branch that is so divided, and we've got a Senate that is so broken. How do we convince people like this asshole Ron Johnson in Wisconsin and his constituents there that hydroxychloroquine isn't going to work? Like, much less an economic policy that's going to work. Like, that's where I get so stuck, that we don't have the same baseline truth on what opportunity is for a job, for healthcare, for education, because they think that we're drinking baby's blood, which reminds me I have to do a live read. I'm so sorry, Eddie, for baby's blood. Folks, baby, your face.
What the hell?
Your face was the greatest. The point being, we're so far apart on what we believe. Like, how do we create opportunity that those who aren't even living in reality when it comes to the pandemic or climate or race, that they see as an opportunity that we also see as an opportunity? That those kinds of policies are hard to sell, I feel, because Hannity will say no.
They are, but I look at frontline workers in hospitals right now. Now that COVID is devastating the Midwest, a lot of folks who don't believe that this is what it is, and they're taking off their masks, screaming, "Tell me what I really have." And you know what they do? They still give them the treatments that they need in order to help them stay alive.
Right.
So part of what I'm saying is I don't need to convince you that this is good for you. What we need to do, this is part of what I'm trying to. It's going to be hard. We got to win the Senate.
Yeah, that was my last question for you.
We have to win the Senate in order for this to happen.
And are you so you specifically talking about the next 40 days in Georgia, or after that?
Next 40 days in Georgia. We got to get down there. And I looked at those numbers in Fulton County, the numbers that were separated, particularly from in Warnock's race. If he can gather those other percentages, because even if Loeffler and Collins combine, if Warnock gets those other voters to come to him, he has a great chance. And the civil war in the Republican Party right now in Georgia preceded Donald Trump's intervention, right? Loeffler and Collins are poster children for that civil war that's happening in Georgia right now. But I think there's a way in which, without Donald Trump on the ballot to increase turnout, this is going to have I think this is going to be a really interesting race. So if the Democrats win the Senate, what they have to do is just simply pursue the agenda. Just pursue the agenda in a very vigorous way. Fox is going to do what Fox is going to do. Yeah. Right. And, they said, remember when the ACA was being passed, you had all of these AstroTurf protests that led to Tea Party and all of this other stuff. And then you look at the data. The most folk, unless you called it Obamacare, the folk who were against it didn't want folk to take away their healthcare. Yeah. So I know I'm going on and on, but I understand what you're saying. We're a divided country. You have those who are in a different information stream.
Yes.
But what the Democrats cannot do is allow that abused orientation to guide how they act. They got to get on with living. They got to get on governing.
Okay, so then the last question is, speaking of Georgia and Texas, and looking at how demographics are changing, how ideology is changing, I think it's pretty clear to say that there's a lot more, I don't want to use the word progressive, but rational-minded people. I don't want to say non-racist or even anti-racist, but that aren't as animated by that. When you look at how it's changed in Georgia, how it changed in Texas, we're headed in the right direction. And if there were a way to obviously get rid of the Electoral College or make Puerto Rico and D.C. states or get more justices on the Supreme Court, as many as you want, weaken the court, not packing the court. I like that language better. Then you would see a major change. But so my question to you is, do you see, like, way off in the future, your son's in his 20s, my daughters are teens, like an America that obviously there's always going to be a lot of racism and sexism and bigotry and so on. It'll always be there. We know that. Terrorism will never end, etc. But do you see a future America where there's way more people that are way less racist or even, inshallah, anti-racist in the future? 10 years, 20 years, with the way that things are changing? Or does it always stay this way because of the catalysts that drive it?
That's a great question. My prayer is that that becomes true. But our history suggests that that's a hard toe.
Yeah.
Right? So part of what we tend to do as a country is we rush to congratulate ourselves. This is the road we're on.
Right.
You know,
pat each other on the back.
And then we fall back into our illusions. We fall back into the safety of our myths and legends.
Easy to do.
Easy to do. We are at a crossroads as a nation. Whenever we face these sorts of moments, we have not done very well. We've doubled down on the ugliness and we've deepened the ugliness in these moments. I can tell you horror stories about the violence exacted in these moments. And let's be very clear. The Boogaloo Boys aren't baby boomers.
Good point.
Dylan Roof is not a baby boomer. Richard Spencer is not a baby boomer. You have a sense
Kyle
that
Rittenhouse.
He's not a baby boomer.
Apparently bought his gun with a part of the stimulus. How did he get that? By the way, he's like 16. Anyway, go ahead with your point. Sorry.
But the point is that, you know, the country is broken. Our way of life is broken, Peter. And there are folks out here who are reaching for languages to try to make sense of what are we going to do in response. Some are reaching for progressive languages. Others are reaching for old, sinister languages, authoritarianism, neo-fascism. We're in a dark place. We're at the crossroads. And, you know, that's where Robert Johnson invented the blues, at the crossroads, Doc.
Yeah, a lot of good things come out of the crossroads. A lot of good things come out of the darkness. And I don't have anything eloquent to say to put a fine point on that other than thank you. Thank you for talking to me. Here's the last thing I'll say is when I'm preparing to talk to you, it's so intimidating because I go through your writing and your appearances on all these other shows. And I'm like, man, this conversation's not going to be as good as those conversations. But I always feel like really good having the conversation. And I think I always learn so much from hearing you and reading you, but to be in conversation with you, as intimidating as it can be, to ask the right questions and say the right things. You always make me feel comfortable and good, stooping down to my associate's degree level. I really appreciate it, sir.
No. I love talking with you. You make my soul smile. Appreciate you, man.
I will take that and I will play it over and over. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, sir.
You take care and stay safe.
All right, Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr. at ES Glaude on the Twitter. You can watch him on MSNBC. And if you get into Princeton, you can take his courses. But absolutely get his books as well, including most recently Begin Again, James Baldwin's America, and its urgent lessons for our own. I always learned so much from him. If you haven't noticed, I'm going a little bit lighter on guests this week. I'm trying to work a little less on Thanksgiving week and work on some other independent projects, help some other people in my life as well. But I will have two guests at least tomorrow, if not more, including Judy Gold is going to join me. Also, Matt Iglesias is a great journalist and writer at Vox. He's got a new book out. I talked with him a little while back, and I'm going to share that with you tomorrow as well. So hopefully you will check that out tomorrow. If you haven't already visited my sponsor, please do. It is givewell.org. Go to givewell.org/standup because we're just weeks away from Giving Tuesday. And if you are giving money to any charity, you're going to want to make it go far. And if you want to be confident your dollars are doing the most good, go to givewell.org/standup. Donate now. I'll tell you more about it tomorrow. And thank you very much for supporting the show with a paid subscription. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic or the paid subscription link in the show notes. And join us anytime on the Discord platform where you're never alone. There's always people chatting. I'm actually going to go check that out right now because people want to help me with the crazy neighbor. I'm not sure there's much that we can do, but I appreciate the moral support. We're out of time. I'll talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up.